Well, thank you indeed. Now we have time for good discussions, and I call on Nicole Goulet from France to present her question.
Oui.
Please.
Yes, it's Natalie, but it doesn't matter. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I have several questions. The first is not a question, but I would like to know whether we could have the text, the whole text of your presentation, as there are many, many references. I think it might be very useful for each and every one of us to have a copy of this briefing so that we may find the references you gave. I think it would be very interesting and very important because these are very specific issues. You mentioned a certain number of elements, and in particular, all the everything that took place upstream. You talked about intelligence warfare. How do you explain that no intelligence service was able to foresee this act of aggression? Then you talked about a fourth World War. So either I missed one, because you talked about the Fourth World War, did you not? And the basic question, the most important question I would like to ask you is the following. Are you disappointed by the way in which the international community responded to this act of aggression? Was there any other possible response in the face of Mr. Putin's aggression, which comes on top of all frozen conflicts, Abkhazia, Ossetia, and Nagorno-Karabakh, to which I attached a great deal of importance? And is there a place for European defense?
Okay. As for the copy of the document, with your permission, I will give it to the Secretariat, and they will be able to distribute it for those who are interested. As for intelligence, I would like to mention at least two the most some kind of dramatic failures of intelligence on the Western alliance, NATO, United States. They were not able to see preparation of the Russian war against Georgia in year 2008. They were absolutely taken by surprise. Even about 100,000 troops have been massed on the borders of Georgia. Even Mr. Saakashvili warned Western allies that the aggression is looming. Nevertheless, it has not been taken seriously. It has been some kind of taken as the normal situation. Nevertheless, we got this Russian-Georgian war with intervention. Another one example, it's this kind of spectacular fail of U.S. intelligence just on the brink, on the eve of the Crimean attack. Just one day before, the U.S. intelligence has announced that they are not expecting publicly, they are not expecting any attack of the Russian troops on Crimea or on Ukraine. Next day, aggression started. So, but another example, later in late, I believe, it was late March or early April, there was several people made statement that, okay, they're expecting attack of the Russian troops on Ukrainian territory within 2 days. With my all limited information resources, I came out and said, no, there will be no this intervention. There's only concentration of the forces for producing feeling of fear, but there will be no intervention. 2 days later, 2 weeks later, months later, there was no direct intervention of those attacks that was expected. So it shows that something really serious happened with intelligence, and this intelligence should be improved really on strategic level. As for Fourth World War, it is not the term that I like, and it is not a term that I invented. The term that has been used by Kremlin, and they're actually correcting those who are using the term Third World War. They're saying, no, come on, that's wrong, not Third World. Third World was a Cold War. It's finished 20 years ago. Now we are starting, and actually they're open, they are not kind of hiding. They're saying, we're starting the Fourth World War. And they're preparing for that for a long time. And actually, I heard this talk about this new World War for a long time. And I actually, even myself, I was saying that it's complete nonsense. It's something really absurd. It cannot be taken seriously. It's only some kind of really hot heads can talk about this issue. But now this is official policy. So that is why my job here is not some kind of to give you some kind of strange concept. I'd like to just to give you some information how these actions are being considered by the other side. How do they view these actions in Ukraine and in some other places? As for reaction of the world, definitely, I'm not happy with some reaction. First of all, with the lack of understanding what's going on and with the lack of desire to understand. That's even worse, because some people just don't want to see and to hear what is really going on. So it's up to definitely different countries and different nations and different organizations to take appropriate decisions. It's up to NATO, up to the United States, up to Europeans to decide what to do. But what is important just to understand what is really going on. I'd like to give one example of the reaction. If you are not aware how the Russian-Georgian war not ended, but some kind of how the movement of Russian troops have been stopped on the way to Tbilisi. On August 11th, in the morning of August 11th, year 2008, Russian troops started the full-fledged advance on Tbilisi. All troops in the South Caucasus received the same orders to take Tbilisi. And they started to move from Seashare, from Abkhazia with Black Sea Fleet, and even the Russian base in Emini has been taken to the highest alert. So, and Mr. Shamanov has been appointed as the commander-in-chief of all Russian troops in the South Caucasus with the purpose to take Tbilisi. This advance has stopped within 24 hours. There are several elements that were able to stop this advance. One of them was resistance of Georgian army element. Another, some kind of the flight of 5 presidents and prime minister, 3 Baltic ones, Ukrainian and Polish presidents to Tbilisi, and physical presence in Tbilisi. And the third element that has not been discussed very widely, the decision of the United States to move US Navy into the Black Sea and the relocation of the US Air Force to Romanian and Turkish air bases. The Russian General Staff has detected this movement, and actually it was not hidden, it was very open, and in 24 hours they stopped movement of Russian troops into Tbilisi. I'm not a bloodthirsty person, I'm from a different world, I'm an economist, and I don't like this stuff. But unfortunately, I have not seen any other elements that were able to stop the movement of hard military power towards Tbilisi. If the US or NATO would take something analogous, something similar steps, on 27th of February or on 28th of February, year 2014, when the group of Russian Spetsnaz has captured the building of the parliament in Simferopol, of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Probably this crisis could be solved that same day. The very fact that this decision has not been made neither then nor later, and due to the fact that unfortunately leading figures of the Western Alliance were saying that they're not going to use military force, even publicly said, make appetite of the aggressor even greater.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I have already a list of those who want to ask, and I will take questions in the group of 2. First is on my list is Michael Szczerba, Poland. Sir.
Dear Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, Mr. Illarionov, thank you very much for your excellent, deep and useful presentation on the situation in Ukraine and its relation with Russia. Of course, we would like to express our solidarity with the people of Ukraine defending their national independence and territorial integrity. In 4 days, President Poroshenko will be in Warsaw attending the 25th anniversary of the free and democratic parliamentary elections in Poland. We are happy about this because Mr. Poroshenko will meet President of the US, France, Germany and other countries, and it will be a good chance to welcome the new elected Ukrainian president, but also to to support him and to give the support of the transatlantic community and its leaders to him. Mr. Illarionov, you also mentioned the difficult situation in the occupied territories of Georgian regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. It seems that Russia has established a pattern of using military force against and illegally occupying and now also illegally annexing territory of neighboring countries. My question is about the situation in Georgia. I mean, how the current situation in Ukraine and actions to destabilize the south and eastern regions of Ukraine can influence on the situation in Georgia, especially before the very important event we are looking for, which is signing the accession agreement with the European Union. So please comment on this, and thank you for your excellent presentation one more.
Thank you, sir. And next is Mr. Munor Alonso, Spain.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to congratulate Mr. Illarionov for his very interesting presentation, very thought-provoking, and with very useful contributions, which come at a very timely time. I've looked into this issue very closely, and I was surprised how Putin uses the Islamophobic actors and authors, rather, from the 19th century and the 20th century. I've seen articles in the International New York Times, and this is very interesting because it seems he wants to connect to some very, well, older ideologies in Russia, and he also uses ideas of the Soviet times. So I've written something. Putin seems to move between neo-Tsarism and neo-Sovietism. And that's something which surprises me because it means that this revisionist operation which is taking place is being shrouded with a very broad ideology which receives the support of Russian public opinion, because according to polls, between 70 and 80% of the Russian population enthusiastically supports that position, which is an aggression for neighboring countries. I think, well, you spoke about the need for a strategy, a counter-strategy to what Mr. Putin is doing, and I think we need to go back to the situation which Kenan proposed with his long telegram during Soviet times, which put an end to the illusions of those who thought that the Second World War allies could continue to be allies when the Cold War hadn't started. Now, there's some now who think that there can be a dialogue with Putin and that you can reach agreements. I see that as an increasingly difficult possibility. It seems that dialogue is now impossible because his mindset is totally different from ours. So I think that we should go back to the idea of containment, deterrence, adapted to this new moment. And I think we should consider how we're going to look at the fact that it's not just Putin. He's not isolated. He has a lot of support in Russia, which gives him strength and legitimacy. The counterweight would be the economic situation, which is difficult. But that's what concerns me, and that's what I wanted to submit to you. Thank you.
As for Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Transnistria, and right now Crimea, it's quite clear that Mr. Putin is using those territories as a military basis. Actually, the largest military basis that we can see in the history and the kind of around the world. I studied the issues of Russian-Georgian war for 5 years, and actually the book that has been written on this issue, probably the most comprehensive on the subject. And I can claim that just the Abkhazia and especially South Ossetia became the most militarized regions of the world, most militarized nations or whatever territories in the world. On the number of tanks or armored machines or artillery pieces or number of troops per 10,000 of population, Abkhazia and South Ossetia exceeds North Korea by a factor of 3. just to imagine some kind of the size of military presence. So this is kind of the military basis of huge size. Something similar now is going with Crimea, with deployment of the new troops, of new military equipment, very heavy equipment with missiles on the Crimean territory. The Transnistria is also very well known for some kind of the location of the 14th Army. So we now know the pattern. Any new territory is going to be new military base of huge size. So that is why for Mr. Putin it's not easy to abandon those military bases for any purpose, even for some kind of for this discussion with new Georgian authority about some kind of normalization of the relations. So they provide some kind of hints that seems to me cannot be fulfilled under the current political regime. They can say that, okay, that Georgia could be united, might be united, if Georgia would change the course. Instead of European integration, instead of integration with NATO, if Georgia joined, let's say, customs union or Eurasian Union and would be some kind of ally with Russia. It seems to me this promise cannot be fulfilled under these current circumstances. It's my personal expert view. So, but such attempts have been taken towards Georgian new authorities. So, as for the question about this new ideology, this is a very important question. This is a new question because it clearly has elements. It's not some kind of distilled new ideology. It's not like purely nationalism, even there are very clear elements of nationalism. It's not clear Tsarism or neo-Tsarism as you're using, but there is clear elements of this. There is not only neo-Sovietism, but clearly elements of that. We used to now some kind of the discussion use such a term like Orthodox Jamikhiria as the same kind of ideal state, ideal view for Mr. Putin of the Russian state, with elements of Tsarism, Sovietism, and nationalism, and Orthodox approach to that. So we will try to to develop what would be the correct term, but it's quite clear that this is something new that is relying heavily on something that was available in the history of the country and what is available around the world. And it is really very important that to understand that we do not have really effective counter-ideology, counter-strategy to fight this new ideology. As for possibility of the dialogue, Mr. Putin is ready for dialogue, and he indicated very clear he is ready to have a dialogue with the European Union, with the United States on Ukraine. And the topic is very clear: how to divide Ukraine. How to take Crimea and to legitimize this occupation of Crimea, how to legitimize so-called federalization of Ukraine with this kind of establishment of the so-called separatist basis with Spetsnaz from Russia and Chechnya and so on. He is prepared for that. And his points of discussions are very clearly announced even last autumn. Non-bloc status for Ukraine, which should be included not only in the constitution of Ukraine, but should be included into the so-called international agreement on Ukraine, where signatories of this agreement would be Russia, US, and EU. That not only Russia would guarantee, but US and EU would guarantee that Ukraine would never join EU and NATO. That's the purpose. So if the Western side would be ready for such type of dialogue with Mr. Putin, he would be extremely happy.
Colleagues, I still have four of us who want to ask questions. I ask you to keep your questions and points as short as possible. Hans Siversen, Norway.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting introduction. We will celebrate, I should say, this year in Norway. It's 70 years ago that the Soviet army liberated northern Norway and withdrew. So there are some paradoxes, actually. But my question, do you see any division among the Russian leadership Or how far from the central leadership do you have to go before you find any other approaches? And secondly, do you see that the economic measures against Russia has any impact at all on the decisions made by Putin?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the arrival of our President, Hugh Bailey, to our committee. We salute you, Hugh. And next is Mr. Ostrak, Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, when we look to the Russian aggression cases, they are always preceded by some unease in economic situation in those countries. So do you think that Russia has some sort of, despite this, despite those countries are separated from Russia, does still have some leverage in those countries to create such an unease, or is it the result of what's happening in the global economy?
As for possibility of division in the Putin's elite, I don't see any sign for that. And you probably need to understand the nature of the political regime. It's not a democracy. It's not even a half democracy. It's not even Mr. Yanukovych's regime. This is an authoritarian regime. And according to the classification of political regime, it is hard authoritarian regime. Nobody around Mr. Putin, including his friends, colleagues, or some kind of whoever they are, have any real power in decision-making process. And they have no power and resources to influence the decision process over there. So that is why expecting that there will be some kind of division and some kind of building strategy relying on this expectation is wrong. We have no signs. We do not have not seen signs of anything like that, and we do not see it so far. It's like, some people do not like it, but with this all comparisons, it's like in 1944 expecting division with this Nazi leadership. So that division could happen, but it will usually after May 8th. As for economic measures and sanctions, so far we have not seen any serious sanctions, frankly speaking, against the aggressor, and those sanctions that have been targeted on some kind of personal level, so far they are, from my point of view, extremely ineffective. And in Kremlin are openly laughing about the sanctions. Certainly they do use those sanctions in the propaganda war, saying that, okay, that the West is surrounding us and some kind of waging a war against us and so on, but they do know that so far these sanctions or economic measures are not effective. Moreover, they have prepared for such type of approach for a long time. For example, there was such a campaign more than a year ago, so-called nationalization of elite in Russia, when Mr. Putin called for all leadership to withdraw assets from European banks, from US banks, to sell all assets, all some kind of houses or whatever, from Europe and United States. It's a very serious preparation, some kind of long time before actual attack, actual aggression has happened. Something similar happened in year 2006, when all of a sudden Putin withdrew from the Treaty on Conventional Forces in Europe. And that time in year 2006, nobody could understand why, because there was no any sign, the reason of that. 2 years later, in August year 2008, with the Russian aggression against Georgia, it became known that he was thinking about what could some kind of make problems for him in this aggression long before, and he take precautionary measures. So the Russian leadership has prepared themselves very seriously to prolonged isolation or semi-isolation and some kind of economic measure against them, and they're prepared to be in this situation for years. So that is why, me personally, as economist, I could say these economic measures would have very limited effect, if at all, if any. As for use of an easy economic situation, Yes, in the case of Ukraine, we have seen clearly that it was a very serious problem in Ukrainian economy that has been aggravated by the Russian actions with trade war, with economic war, with financial war, with sanitary war that made Ukraine falling into real crisis. It's clearly. But in the case of Georgia, it was very different. Georgia was growing 9% per year in the first half of year 2008. It was one of the fastest growing economy of that region. Nevertheless, it did not stop Mr. Putin from attack, and after that was some kind of very negative consequence. So it seems to me that this fact, if it is possible to use this situation, okay. If not, it's not. What is being used effectively, so-called favorable political situation. Right now, for Kremlin, the current economic situation in Europe, with a long economic crisis, is considered to be extremely favorable situation for attack, because Europe is not ready for any serious measures that would be counter to this aggression. And also they do consider the political leadership in the United States right now is relatively weak, that should be exploited at maximum during the remaining 2.5 years. And that is why they're trying to do as much as possible during this time. So that is why it's a very smart approach, using some kind of environment, either economic one or political one, to get to their targets.
Thank you, Andrey. And last two, those who want to ask, first is Mr. Pavlenko. Please observe the time limit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Illarionov, thank you very much for this bright presentation and very profound answers to the questions. I would like to ask you one thing. You describe quite an impressive picture, but we know that every evil would have its own fatal points and its own weak sides. So where does the skeleton, the immortal, has the egg with the needle that has to be broken? Thank you.
Thank you indeed. And colleagues, with your kind permission, may I give a floor to the Ukraine's ambassador to NATO? I believe he has a reason to be given this opportunity. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to thank Mr. Illarionov for his presentation. I asked for the floor not in my capacity as ambassador, but rather as an expert. What we discuss now and what we faced, it's absolutely new phenomena, which requires new approaches. It cannot be described in conventional terms with conventional methodology. And it's not a problem to upgrade the definition of aggression. The problem is what to do with UN, with Security Council, which failed to react on this new situation. And when we discuss the issue, it brings me up to works of well-known politicians, Gilas, Zinoviev, and novelist George Orwell, who described many years ago the situation like that. And referring to his famous novel Animal Farm, I would like also to propose to discuss what is going on in new terms. All of us know what is realpolitik. What we face now, I propose to call zoopolitics, which is driven by instincts, which has nothing to do with democracy, with reality. What we see that the desire of Mr. Putin to build a kingdom surrounded by wall with Russian, so-called Russian world. I would prefer also to call this phenomena not Russian world, but Pax Russica, because during the times of Cold War we had Pax Americana and Pax Sovietica. It's time for Pax Russica. How to handle that? Thank you very much.
First of all, concerning these fatal points, I think there are two. The first one is Russian society. It's true, Russian society has been zombied, has been brainwashed very seriously. It's true. Nevertheless, the real some kind of long-term victory could be achieved if Russian society would be some kind of would become again healthy, would understand what's going on. And in the business of healing the Russian society from this unconventional propaganda war, which actually we have not seen even in the Soviet times and the communists, because it's much more sophisticated and much more effective. The critical ally of the Russian society and Russian people is Ukrainian people. There is no more people, nation and society that closer to Russia and that has such a leverage in Russia than Ukraine. And that's a very interesting situation. Ukraine became victim of this aggression, but in Ukraine there is also keys, not all keys, but substantial portion of keys to success in this, let's say, new unconventional war. It is very difficult and it's not usual, and kind of substantial portion of Ukrainian society also is disappointed and some kind of under shock that the messages from Ukraine are not being met in Russia because of this zombie state of the Russian society. Nevertheless, strategically, Ukraine has a special role and could play the very important role in healing the Russian society and some kind of restoring democracy, rule of law, and this kind of the open society in Russia, as it happened actually in 17th century, which also Ukraine played a very important role. Another element is the West, but I would say probably the world. Because even in that Security Council that probably our ambassador, your ambassador, was referring to, it was quite striking to listen not only that US ambassador or British ambassador, French ambassador was some kind of making reprimands to the Russian representative, but also representative of African countries was saying that there's the rude violation of international law and principles. So that is why the world itself is much more prepared, is much more educated, and much more adult than the leaders of some particular country. And that is why the joint efforts of the world, not only with the West, but the world, could be very helpful. But in the case if the world would be some kind of stick to principles, the principles that have been put into the United Nations Charter, but is not implemented in practice. So that is why all these aggressions have been made possible because of some problems in the international architecture, in the international relations and international security. So that is why, to address this issue, we can see that it's not only an issue of Mr. Putin. It's a very important problem, but also this aggression, some kind of enlightened some problems that existed already in the international system. And I have one more correction. With your permission, I would like to call this not Pax Russica. It's not a Russica approach. This is a Pax Putinica. Okay, let's fight against Pax Putinica. Okay, and substantial portion of Russians in Russia, and actually those Russians, ethnic Russians that are in Ukraine, in absolute majority are patriots of Ukraine and patriots of democratic and open society of Ukraine. So that is why this war should not be considered by anyone as a war against ethnic Russians or real Russians. That should be against authoritarian, aggressive Putin's regime.
Andrey, thank you very much for your presentation. Indeed, although you called Putin regime as powerful as it is, but having such an analysis, I would call it's probably one of the best weapons against that regime. I mean, to understand the principles and probably procedures they go on, it's a great deal. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for presenting us, and we all wish you all the best and looking forward to meet you on different occasions at NATO PA. Thank you.